So, welcome everyone to this Workforce Wednesday webinar. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I will be your moderator and facilitator for this webinar. I'm also your tech support, so feel free to reach out to me if you have any technology issues during the session. Today's session is about how to build a pre-apprenticeship for Illinois specifically, pathways to success. And we are joined by some awesome presenters from the field today that we can't wait to hear from. So first, I'm going to go over just some housekeeping things. So again, my name is Kirsten Bayer. I am the Digital Communications Manager at our center. You might have heard of our center, ICSPS, or the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. And our role in the Workforce Wednesday webinars is to support and facilitate and then develop the professional development for the system. So we are excited to have this presentation this Wednesday. I'm joined by my colleague, Tanner Crawford. Tanner is our apprenticeship guru of the center. He deals with all things apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship, works very closely with Illinois WorkNet, and his official title is our Workforce Innovation Coordinator. And so he is also with our center. That's a typo on the slide, so I apologize, Tanner. But he is also with our center, not with WorkNet. So he is with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. And so you might have worked with him if you were familiar with anything apprenticeship. You might have worked with Tanner. He is new to his role, but he is doing a marvelous job so far. So we're excited to have him with us today. We're also joined by Manny Rodriguez, who is the founder and executive director of Revolution Workshop. And we're also joined by Rebecca Lake. She is an Apprenticeship USA leader and speaker, and she has her own consulting firm. So we are excited to hear from both of them. We'll hear a little bit more about them and their roles here in a second. Couple of housekeeping items that I want to go over is that we are on Zoom webinar. So you do not have the ability to unmute yourselves. We are going to have an opportunity for an open discussion. And how we're going to facilitate that is during the end of the session when we break for questions and answers. You will have the ability to raise your virtual hand on Zoom, and then I can unmute you if you would like to ask a question live. You also have the opportunity to ask any questions or post any comments or success stories or concerns in the chat or the Q&A, and I will be moderating that and facilitating that to both Manny and Rebecca throughout the session. So feel free to do that. You know, we don't want you to have a great question and then forget it. So feel free to type it in the chat and we can facilitate that during the Q&A as well. I'm going to put up our first poll that we do every Workforce Wednesday. First, we just like to know where you're joining us from today. So that's up now, and you can go ahead and answer that. Where's your local area? I'm joining you from Central Illinois. Our office is located in Bloomington Normal. Tanner is also located in Bloomington Normal with me. So that's where we're joining you from this morning. And while you guys are answering that, a couple of other housekeeping items. This session is being recorded. It will be up on our Illinois Workforce Academy website, which I will put that URL in the chat for you all here in a second. And it will also be up on Illinois WorkNet's website as well. All of our Workforce Wednesday webinars are always recorded and up for viewing afterwards. So if you have a colleague or someone else you think would benefit from this information, you can feel free to revisit the session and the recording. And then also the presentation slide deck from today will be available to you. And I also will put that in the chat in a URL here in a second. So you will have that, and then you will also receive a follow-up email tomorrow that will have all of that information in it for you. So it'll be like a one-stop shop, and you'll have the URL with the recording, the presentation slide deck, and then you'll also have the opportunity to do a follow-up survey. And so we ask that you take a couple minutes out of your workday and just give us any feedback on this session, or if there's any future topics that you would like to hear about. We do look at those surveys and we bring them back to the WIOA PD committee. And that committee is who provides and facilitates and executes the professional development for the system. So we do look at your comments and your feedback. So we appreciate your participation. So I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. It looks like most of you are joining us from the Chicago area and actually quite a few people from down south as well. And we're all sprinkled throughout the state. So it's great to see statewide representation for pre-apprenticeship. Um, and then which partner do you best represent? This is a little bit different of a webinar because some of you might be from community colleges, so you're more Title II. Some of you might be from the CTE side of things. Some of you might be a CBO. So if you're like a CBO, feel free to pick other WIOA partner and stakeholder. Or if you're from Title I, Title II, 3 or 4, this is just for our analytics and reporting purposes. So again, we appreciate your participation. And while you guys are finishing answering that poll, just going to go over the agenda for today. So first, we're going to hear from Tanner, who's going to discuss the pre-apprenticeship framework and what that looks like for the state. Then we're going to hear from Manny about community-based organizations and what building a pre-apprenticeship looks like for a CBO. And then we're going to hear from Rebecca, who's going to touch on what a pre-apprenticeship looks like for the education side of things and at the community college level. All right, so I'm going to end that poll. It looks like we have quite a few other WIOA partners and stakeholders, and then sprinkled across Title I and II. So I shared those results so you guys can see what I'm seeing here. And then I'll stop sharing. Awesome. Okay, so I think that wraps up all of my housekeeping items. I'm going to, oh, just kidding. I have one more slide. Oops, I forgot about this. So first, we kind of just want to gauge the audience. So you're not quite done with polls yet. We would just like to know from our side of things and to help the presenters really be able to give you, Manny and Rebecca, they have a wealth of knowledge, right? And we only have so much time this morning. So they would like to know, what is your level of understanding about pre-apprenticeships and how they work? Do you have minimal knowledge about them, moderate knowledge, or do you consider yourself to be pretty advanced in your pre-apprenticeship knowledge? So we're seeing that poll come through now. And most of you are saying minimal knowledge, which is probably why you wanted to join this webinar. So we're excited to present the information to you. And quite a couple of you are saying moderate. So maybe you just need a little bit more info. Awesome. Give everybody a couple more seconds here. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and end that, and then I'll share the results. Looks like, again, as I said, 14 people, 78% of people said they have a minimal knowledge of pre-apprenticeships, how they work, how to set one up, etc. And then 22% of people said moderate. Nobody said advanced. So nobody is an expert except for Mimi and Rebecca on this webinar. And so they are going to share their wealth of knowledge. We're excited to hear from them. And hopefully you will leave this webinar knowing a little bit more about pre-apprenticeships and building them. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead now. This wraps up my section of the presentation, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Tanner Crawford, who is going to talk about the pre-apprenticeship program specifics for Illinois. Oops, I'll go back, Tanner, sorry.
That's okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. As Kirsten has already said, I'm just going to run through some basics of pre-apprenticeship before Manny and Rebecca get into the nitty-gritty details for you. So the goal of a pre-apprenticeship program, the overall goal is to prepare individuals to apply for and be selected by employer partners to enter a registered apprenticeship program, and then, of course, the non-registered apprenticeship program as well. So the program content and strategies are designed to assist individuals to succeed after admission to the registered apprenticeship program and be hired by the employer. The program has at least one documented employer with connections to the registered apprenticeship program that are going to agree to interview the pre-apprenticeship completers for hire. So this is a good thing. And then on a successful completion, the individuals are supported to apply for an apprenticeship. And then because of that connection to the registered apprenticeship, they may receive the hiring preference by the employer. You can go to the next slide if you could, Kirsten. So this is the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board's approved definition for pre-apprenticeship. And this came from the pre-apprenticeship work group that Manny is actually the chair of under the Apprenticeship Illinois Committee, which is also under the IWIB. So the pre-apprenticeship programs are designed to prepare individuals to enter and succeed in an apprenticeship program or in another career pathway. So pre-apprenticeship programs have 6 core elements, which they're on the screen here, but I'll go ahead and read them for you. The inclusive recruitment of underrepresented individuals, and I wanted to stop on that one just for a second. And what we mean by underrepresented individuals. So historically, underrepresented populations include, but are not limited to, underrepresented racial or ethnic persons and women, out-of-school youth, veterans, returning citizens, and individuals with disabilities. So that's what we mean when we're talking about underrepresented individuals. I just wanted to stop on that and define that real quick. And another one is industry-focused curriculum and training, hands-on learning and work-based learning, retention services for successful participation and completion, partnerships with employers and connections to apprenticeship programs, and to strive for that credential acquisition. And I believe Manny is going to touch a little bit more on these, but these are just the 6 core elements that came from the pre-apprenticeship work group, like I said, from Apprenticeship Illinois. So that is what I've got for you. I'm going to hand it over to Manny, who, as we've already said, is the director of Revolution Workshop and the chair of the pre-apprenticeship group.
Thanks, Tanner. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to jump right in, and I have a couple of slides dedicated kind of to some best practices informing community-based or nonprofit pre-apprenticeship programs. I really want to dive in today and start with the number one thing that we need to highlight when we're talking about whether it's apprenticeship or pre-apprenticeship, is that the employer is critical to the establishment of any type of pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship pathway. Without that employer, you don't have access to the employment, and again, that apprenticeship training that happens on the job. And that is very, very critical. You have to start there. And for me, it really takes dedicated staff that you have to hire that are responsible for maintaining your employer relationships. Now, let's say you're a small nonprofit and you have the training side down, and you want to expand your employer inputs or connections. You can work with, and here Kirsten in the webinar chat put a link to the Apprenticeship Illinois website. There is a system here in our framework in Illinois of navigators and intermediaries. And so you can reach out, each region has a navigator, and they should be able to reach out and give you information on your particular region, your demand, some of the big employers in your region. If there are any intermediaries, you might be asking yourself, what is an intermediary? Think of an intermediary as a quarterback. You as the pre-apprenticeship is the running back. There are other positions on the offense. Maybe there's a social support agency. There's the employers. All of those entities and stakeholders make up the apprenticeship pathway and serving your particular region. The intermediary is there to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And those organizations could be chambers of commerce. They could be community colleges. They could be themselves a community-based organization, but that is really the role of that entity. And that intermediary can be very helpful, again, in you building authentic relationships with those employers and really tying you into them. I really don't think you should develop curriculum. And again, this is best practice strategies. We looked at multiple apprenticeship models when we were doing this framework definition across the United States, and really the best ones develop their curriculum with the employer at the table. And that is so critical. You, at the end of the day, they're your end customer. If you do not provide the entry-level talent that they need, then you failed any of the job seekers that are in your program, and you failed that employer, and no one has won. So that is why you have to really develop this relationship from start. The other thing is that now these employers become your champions. And so when those critical first employers that buy in and start to hire and work with you, they're going to talk to their peers. And they're going to say, hey, this organization really has something here, and you should work with them. And there's nothing like peer-to-peer, kind of recommendations. That really helps legitimize your program. it really helps also legitimize the graduates that are coming out of your program. And I really think, that is a very key part to developing that relationship. Obviously, the employer hires, right? So that, they're going to hire and then place them into a registered apprenticeship. Those are key. And again, that's what you want. I think the last big reason why you want to develop this relationship with employers is that they have access to resources, right? You're essentially offering sometimes a free service to them, which they would often have to pay, a headhunter or go on Indeed and find folks. And if they're getting folks from you, they might be willing to share some of that recruiting costs as a grant back to you, as a donation back to you. They also can just provide in-kind donations and things like that. And I'll go a little bit into that in the funding slide later. I think the other piece that when you're doing this, again, as a community-based pre-apprenticeship, you really need to understand you can't be everything to everybody. You got to collaborate with other groups, especially around the critical support services that are sometimes needed when you're dealing with underrepresented populations. They require different types of social supports. And if you're not embedding your curriculum with these critical social supports, you are setting up your participants, unfortunately, for a little bit of failure. You have to be able to make sure your job as the pre-apprenticeship is to remove all barriers to success of them getting into employment and into that registered apprenticeship. And again, sometimes you can't do that all by yourself. I know for us at Revolution Workshop, I partner with Title II providers in Chicago to provide the critical math remediation that I need. I serve construction. You need to be able to add and subtract fractions. You need to be able to do decimal conversions. Well, instead of me hiring a bridge instructor, why don't I just work with the existing Title II network and they provide that for me? And that's exactly what we did. But there's other things like housing, there's childcare, there's transportation, there's other things like that where you can really utilize other community groups and their resources to be able to provide, again, a holistic approach to this work. And that's really what it requires, again, when we're dealing with underrepresented populations. Tanner highlighted, and I cannot agree more. I mean, it's a big move for us at the apprenticeship committee, at the state. We really want to push, equity. For far too long, apprenticeship has not been equitable. And it has not been accessible to all people. And this is important to work with, again, those other community groups that might be homeless shelters, recovery centers, violence prevention organizations. Each of them are working with people, churches. Each of these folks are working with folks that might be at rock bottom and they're getting them to some form of stability. And you can work with them to then take those folks and get them ready for work. And that is where your role plays in that. So I really would highlight, again, the need to collaborate. You can't do this alone. Kirsten, you can go next slide. One thing you really want to have in your pre-apprenticeship program is rigor. You want to be able to, and what I put here is simulate a work environment. You're not going to want to pass everyone. You want to do your due diligence on recruiting people and making sure that they really are interested in the sector that you're preparing them for, interested in the occupation that you're preparing them for, right? You want to make sure that they're the right fit. Don't just recruit a warm body. That does nobody any good. It doesn't do them any good. They're wasting their time in that particular instance. You want to make sure that you're not participating or perpetuating already long-standing issues in our system where we have left people behind, or we have maybe sold them on a dream that wasn't really a reality. And this is where I do think you gotta, again, work with your partners on the recruitment side to make sure folks are serious and help them along the way. You got to hold them to high standards of accountability. Again, they're going to go to work. And it does you no good to pass somebody that you know was late 75% of the time to your training, maybe was not even in attendance for 25%. What's going to end up happening is that same behavior is just going to translate to the employer, and they're going to be fired within week one. And again, no one wins in that situation. One thing I will tell you, I've done this for a long time. Again, I've taken best practices from other regions in the country. The best programs, they do this. You're not assisting someone if you just pass them to pass them. That is not helping them. And if we do this work as community-based organizations because our missions are to help our community inherently, right? And I think this is the piece that I would just say, you can hold folks from underrepresented and with people with barriers to high standards of accountability and still help them, right? They may not get everything day one. I'm not suggesting that you cherry pick or that they have to have everything, but you just have to make sure that the basics, like coming on time and having a good attitude and hustling and being able to communicate and holding them to that accountability. And when you're coaching them, that you have a method where you're saying, okay, they're getting the coaching. Because again, if they can't do it with you when you have their arm wrapped around them and you care about them, some of these sectors, let's be honest, in manufacturing and construction in particular, they can be a little rough. Their bosses are not going to be like, oh, you made a mistake. I know you tried really hard. It's going to be some other colorful language maybe that is communicated to them. I'm not saying that is good. I'm not saying that we should not be treating people with dignity, but I also want to be real about some of the challenges that we face on the apprenticeship side of this fence. And so again, you got to prepare them for that. You can't prepare them for the best case. You want to hope for the best, but prepare them for the worst. And that's really, what I would mean about holding them to accountability. It's a very fine line. Again, this is another area where you can work with employers, especially if there's internship opportunities, work experience opportunities. I would strongly encourage you to take these on as much as possible, because there's only so much you can simulate in a lab environment or in your own, CBO. It's not work, right? So you want to be able to provide those kind of authentic experiences. Bare minimum, you want the employers to come in and talk to be active in talking to the trainees themselves. But nothing's better than actually showing them and letting them get a little experience out in the field in that particular occupation. I think the last best practice strategy I kind of want to highlight here is you got to really be invested in continuous quality improvement. You got to actively be surveying your participants, finding out, are you hitting all of their needs? Are you identifying or have a plan to deal with all the barriers that your participants come to your program with? As a pre-apprenticeship, that is your obligation, right? Is to try, if you can't eliminate the barrier, then that participant or trainee has to be able to go to that job and have a plan to overcome or get around that barrier. And so you can't things are always changing, people's change, situations change, our macro environment changes. And so you have to be constantly surveying your participants and making sure that you, again, are addressing those critical needs. Make those surveys anonymous so that they can be honest with you. You want to make sure you get honest feedback. This is not about ego, right? We're doing the best we can, and sometimes that's great and that's good enough, and sometimes it's not. And if it's not, then we just need to know so that we can make the necessary tweaks to our programming so that we are doing the right things. I think it's to survey your employers. Again, they're your end customer. Find out how successful are your participants being. You should be tracking your participants even post-placement, post your pre-apprenticeship. Retention services are key. I know in my sector in construction, 90% of people that are going to drop out and don't make it to journey level, don't complete their apprenticeship, do it within the first 2 years of their apprenticeship. And that's actually, that stat kind of goes across all sectors. So you want to make sure that you're hand holding them at minimum for the first year, that you are actively talking to them and continuing to work with them. And again, taking their feedback. You know, we've learned the most from our alumni. Hey, you know, it would have been great if you would have showed us this. This would have really been able to prepare us better for this opportunity. That is the kind of feedback that is gold, and you really just need it. And again, it got to come from two perspectives. It's got to come from both sets of customers. I really want you to look at them as two customers, your dual customer. You got your participants, and then you have your employers. They're both your customer. And you got to see, you know, again, where you're deficient at, and then create plans, meet as a team, you know, with your team, meet with your intermediary, right? If you're a part of that structure, and work together to make sure that you're addressing all of those concerns and making your program as good as you can. And then just continue to do that, because I think the worst mistake you can do in this work is to think that you know it all, because that's when you get bit. No one here knows. I appreciate Kirsten using the word expert. I'm still learning every day in this work. Every time I run a new cohort, I learn. And I push that onto my team as well. That's what you have to build, is that culture of constantly looking back and improving your work. Next slide, Kirsten. So there's some good news right now, especially for community-based organizations, nonprofits. There's a lot of money in the street. I've been doing this for, probably about 15, 16 years now. And I've never seen this much resources, both public and private, that are available to groups like ours. And so there are at least 10 different state and federal programs right now that fund our work. There are at least, and if you're in the Chicago area, there's a lot more private foundations and things of that nature. But again, that's why I tell you, work with those employers. They may have access. They all have CSR arms. Kirsten, you can go back. Okay, thanks. They may have CSR arms, corporate social responsibility arms, that then have different, access to different foundation support. You may not have the family foundations that we have up here, but there are other things out there, and I would encourage you to look at all of that. Again, work with the intermediary. And I would really tell you this: you don't always have to be the lead on the grant. In fact, sometimes with these grants, especially government grants, it helps you to build your own internal capacity to be the lead one day if you're a sub-grantee playing a very specific role, and you're getting money from somebody like an intermediary to play your role. I can't tell you enough. I do this myself with other groups, particularly in Chicago. I do this with Hire 360. They go after major government grants. They're the lead. I am a sub to them, and I say, I'm going to train X many people and put them into your database. And does that require a level of trust? Absolutely, right? But that's where I mean about the collaboration I was talking about earlier. You have to be able to look at that and be able to be open to that possibility, because again, leading on all of this stuff is not always, you can get dragged down in a lot of bureaucracy that doesn't add any value to the ultimate training of your participants, right? And your ultimate success of your participants. But if you're a sub-grantee, some of that bureaucratic load is taken off of you. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. Again, it can help you build capacity. I always tell nonprofits when they ask me about funding, you got to make sure the grant is the right fit. Don't chase money just to chase it. If it doesn't fit, it's okay. There'll be something else. And maybe it's not a fit now, right? Maybe you're having to educate that funder on, hey, some of the nuances in your sector, with your region, with your population, right? That sometimes can be a multi-year process. But don't make the mistake of putting yourself in a grant where you're really not a good fit. It just really hurts you. And then you have set yourself, if you fail, you've now set yourself up for, a harder road to go get additional funding because you didn't hit up, you didn't, weren't successful on that grant that you really shouldn't have got from the beginning. And again, I did talk about employer support. I mean, we leverage them all the time for financial things. You can do fundraisers. They love to sponsor events, and that's a big thing in our world. But the in-kind is amazing. They can come in and do training modules for you during your duration of your pre-apprenticeship. They can come in and do the mock interviewing, right? Have the employers come in and do the mock interviewing instead of you and your coaches just doing it. They can provide the raw material, at least in the case of construction and manufacturing. They may be able to help with machinery and tooling upgrades and equipment, and software for IT companies. I know that this is big in IT apprenticeships. They provide the software, and then training on that side as well. So I just think that's another way you can really leverage funding support from the employer group. And with that, I have the pleasure of passing it on to Dr. Rebecca Lake. Myself and Rebecca have been working on this Apprenticeship Illinois framework for a few years now. She's a wonderful colleague. She's retired now. She was formerly at Harper College, and she started her own company, Rebecca Lake Consulting. She is an Apprenticeship USA leader and an invited speaker at workforce and apprenticeship conferences across the country. Rebecca is particularly well known for starting the 2015 national movement for community colleges to be a registered apprenticeship sponsor while she was at Harper. And so I can think of no better person to kind of talk about the community college side of this fence than my colleague, Dr. Lake. So I will pass it on to her.
And thank you, Manny. And welcome everybody to this wonderful program to learn a little bit more about apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship bridge programs. We've heard from Tanner, who set you up very well to make sure that you knew exactly the elements from the Illinois perspective of what is in a pre-apprentice program. And then you've heard Manny with his wealth of information about CBOs and talking about employers and the critical, if you don't have employers, you don't have a registered apprenticeship program. So there's no use to have a pre-apprentice program. So it's those employers that are so critical. And we talked about intermediaries, and we talked about underrepresented individuals, making sure that equity is now introduced in almost all of our education kinds of services, as well as grants are coming out. Manny was right on the money there. Lots of grant money is coming out, and they all have this equity kind of embedded thread throughout them. And then we heard from Manny, which I really like a lot. We embedded CQI, continuous quality improvement, because if you don't do that and ask those participants within your system, how are things going? Did we have the right kind of information for you so you're successful, so that you can always keep going forward? You'll make changes and tweaks all the time. So think of this as a pre-apprenticeship bridge program in community colleges that is worth making sure that you have the system so that you can make sure the system always stays adaptable, flexible, and meeting the needs and requirements of all participants. So as we look here, we prepare, as we know, the pre-apprentice to go into a registered apprenticeship program. And I put non-apprentice programs just in case, because I've run into that when I was at Harper, that some employer, particularly it was in advanced manufacturing, he just says, I have a kind of a type of apprentice. I'm not a sponsor, but I call him my apprentice, and so wanted to give a nod to that. but these are really designed for registered apprenticeship programs. And so one of the key things for you to understand is who is the registered apprenticeship program sponsor. So as we start, is it you, the community college? And out at Harper, we had 11. They have more now. At many community colleges across the state, they have quite a few. Some have 18, some have 3, some have 7. And they're always building more registered apprenticeship programs. So who is that program sponsor? That audience? The employer has it, or the community college has it, or is it the union? Is it the CBO? That kind of tells you how and in what ways you want to design this beautiful system to prepare pre-apprentices to go into registered apprenticeship programs. So I will obviously look through this as a lens of community colleges, and their pre-apprentice programs. Understanding that is that we know that community colleges have all types of bridge programs. So we're familiar with this type of concept. Now the credit side of the house may not be as familiar as the non-credit side of the house, but we have these bridge programs, and bridge programs are really surviving and growing well in community colleges, whether it's IT bridge programs or apprenticeship or occupation specific bridge programs. We know them, we understand them. So know that you have these types of bridge programs, because if we look at pre-apprentices, it's serving the pre-apprentice and moving them in across the bridge to the apprenticeship. Next slide, please. So this is the next slide that I'd like to just kind of hit on all of these content specific, these 5 here, is that the community college may need to refigure some of the elements it already has in place, add it to, tweak it, and then offer it as this system for a pre-apprentice program. The focus is obviously the pre-apprentice, but one of the things we need to ask is who holds the registered apprenticeship program sponsor? If the community college does, and it's an associate's degree, probably some of the things that you might want to put in the pre-apprentice program, getting them ready to be out there to be interviewed so that they could be hired for an apprenticeship program, is that you'll want to make sure that they can do all the placement test and do it well. So math, reading, and writing. And some of the things that we found throughout my time at Harper, because essentially we've run these programs when I was there for 5 years. So this is all tested kinds of things that's been run through the mill, and we share it with anybody that we can, is that a lot of people who come into the pre-apprentice program and getting ready to take the placement test so that you can do a credit-bearing AAS degree, is that I haven't done math in a long time and I'm afraid of math. What we found was some people are afraid of math and some people are afraid of reading and writing part of the test. So if you kind of bring them up to date, because some of them may have not been in high school or a few college credits, or maybe they're job shifters, or they're back out into the community, that they need to be skilled in reading and writing and math. And so make sure that you put that in there so that they can be successful. Because as Manny says, this is all about success. How do we prepare them so they can be successful? There is no time, no length of time specified by state or federal law. So you can have your program for any amount of time that you want. However, let me give you some thoughts about that. You have asked me as a pre-apprentice participant to come in here and spend, I don't know what the time is, you tell us, I would tell the pre-apprentice, it's an 8-week course. Oh my goodness, then essentially I can't do, and if you want me to stay there 4 hours a day, then I actually can't, or have a difficult time working somewhere else, because I still need to work. I'm a mom, a single mother. I need to work. I need to have something come in. This is a barrier. You heard Manny talking about getting rid of barriers, but that's a barrier. I don't have childcare. And if this is so time consuming, this pre-apprenticeship program, then I might not be able to do that second job. I mean, how do I pay my rent? How many days a week does it have to be? Does it have to be Monday through Friday for 8 weeks? Does it have to be Monday, Wednesday, and Friday? Does it for 4 weeks? Can it be in the evening? What does it need to be? And so these are things that you need to think about, that you need to address as you design your program. For example, are you going to give stipends? Or will you find a grant that is able to help meet those kinds of needs and take care of barriers? You can't make me go out and work at some place when I actually need to work so that I can have money to pay for my rent. This is a perfect time when we talk about all of these kinds of cumbersome barriers that goes and might prevent somebody from being a registered apprenticeship, the pre-apprentice program, to get into a registered apprentice. Because once they're in a registered apprenticeship program, they are paid. So that's the goal. The goal is you have them do things so that understanding elements and getting curriculum and having the retention and having somebody interested and meeting those barriers so that they have a chance to apply for and be hired into a registered apprenticeship program. So we need to make sure that we address those kinds of things. This is a perfect example and a perfect place for you as a community college to make those relationships with CBOs that might help you with recruitment, CBOs that might help you with transportation, CBOs that might help you with a stipend, CBOs that might help you with childcare, CBOs that might help you with any kind of thing that is a barrier. So one of the things that I'm recognizing, because I'm doing a lot of coaching with colleges across the Illinois for an Illinois Community College board, and a lot of the colleges have seen me. I'm doing the WEI, the Workforce Equity Initiative. We're wrapping up this year the CAPIT grant, which is computer apprenticeships. It's a computer registered apprentice in IT. And I'm helping now, starting to help in the PATH grant, which is that money that's coming out to all community colleges about health careers. And so there's this equity thread that's going through all of them. Colleges inside themselves may braid that funding to help and set up a pre-apprentice program, paying stipends, those kinds of things that might lead into an apprenticeship program. You might want to think about talking to someone in those kinds of grants who in your college that might be useful. And so as Manny was saying too, there's a lot of money coming out for pre-apprentice and apprenticeship programs and workforce equity. These are all things. Pre-apprentice program doesn't have workforce equity in its title, but it's the same kind of thing when you serve the underserved. So now I'm going to move to curriculum, number 5 here in the curriculum. So we've talked about time. Time cannot be so constrictive that these people can't last and as they go through the apprenticeship program. So curriculum. And one of the things about curriculum is what to put into it. And it's your choice about how to set them up, but it needs to meet those elements, some of the elements and the elements that we had heard from Tanner for a suggested quality pre-apprenticeship program. So if you're writing for a grant, you want to include those kinds of things that you're thinking about. One of the things I want to encourage you to know is that people inside your community college are writing for many of these grants. Don't reinvent the wheel and don't lose any ideas. So that if somebody is running the Workforce Equity Initiative grant, that system they have in place might be easily adapted to the pre-apprenticeship program. Systems in place means you have a way to move and streamline and move people through that meet their needs and have successful outcomes. So make sure that you actually talk to each other. You know, community colleges have been set in these silos and it's starting to break down now. Credit people are talking to non-credit, talking to customized training, talking to the continuing education, talking to adult education. So they're all starting to talk to each other. Continue that so that the systems don't have to be reinvented, but somebody who has a great system, you just might need to tweak it for something else, like pre-apprenticeship programs. We need to make sure that you decide in your curriculum who and what kind of programs you're going to address. The next slide, please. All right, and here's my last slide when we look at curriculum and content. So even though the registered apprenticeship program sponsorship might reside in the community college, all different kinds, what brings them all together is the employer, because we can't have a registered apprenticeship program sponsored by community colleges if we don't have the person hired as a registered apprentice. So a community college needs to decide what kind of pre-apprenticeship program do you want to have. And so A here is, do you want to make a pre-apprenticeship, registered apprenticeship, moving them into that, that sponsors many occupations? You know, because we had advanced manufacturing, we had insurance, we had banking and finance, we had trucking, we had, you know, many design, we had lots of them. So do you want insurance, you know, do you want to serve all kinds of programs? Or do you want to focus on only one occupation, such as what Manny was talking about, advanced manufacturing or construction? And you would need that in your institution. You know, do you have construction? Harper would never do a registered apprentice in automobile because we didn't have it. We didn't even have that curriculum. So you wouldn't do that. So that you need to decide, because it will look a little different. Not a lot, but it'll look a little different. And so the program, and I would strongly suggest in this, we're still talking about getting people into the pre-apprentice program, is that you hire an intake worker. And an intake worker could be off another grant and paid a little bit here, but that the person takes all of the applications or the interest that comes in to your website or wherever you have the portal to come in so you can get the information for the pre-apprentice program, so that you create an intake form that will gather lots of information for you as well as for the employers. And you will make sure that that has an assessment on it, because you need to look at what do they want to learn or what do they need to learn, either in this serving many different kinds of registered apprentice occupations or serving the one registered apprenticeship occupation. So for example, the curriculum, all of these grants that are out is looking at employability skills. If you talk, and Manny talks to many different as well as you guys. I'm sure you all talk to employers. It's about employability skills. Can they read and write and do English? Can they do some math? Can they understand time management? Can they work as a team? Do they have communication skills? Can they talk to you? Can they adapt to the workplace? We were at a WEI conference yesterday, and the Lumina Foundation has done some work with the WEI, the Workforce Equity Initiative grant, and they're talking about these same kinds of things. An overview of diversity skills, and then an overview if you have your pre-apprentice program designed to serve many occupations, an overview of what is the responsibility of a pre-apprentice and an apprentice. And you could use them for both, but you need to make sure that everybody understands what that's like. Maybe you need in the one that is multiple occupations, an assessment, a career kind of an assessment as to what do you want to do? Do you want to do advanced manufacturing? Would you rather do construction? Would you like to do insurance or banking or teachers? Lots of teacher registered apprenticeships coming out now. And so that you have an idea of what is it that you want to build your curriculum around. Because it's important that, for example, if you had multiple registered apprenticeship occupations in there, that those individuals who want to do advanced manufacturing or something in construction has an opportunity to go out and see if that's really what you want to do. So as we wrap up here, is that with your teacher, make sure that the teachers are very talented and creative. It's not just the place that teachers can just do that and not worry about anything, but that it takes that kind of teacher to want to retain individuals in the pre-apprentice program and do assessment about how you're doing and how can we make it better. For students, it's about the intaking, the inclusivity of underrepresented people and those that might come in. And then you need to talk to your employers about, will they be able to hire those that might have a disability? Advanced manufacturing is a perfect example of that. Could they hire those individuals as we send them out to interview? And so the last in the employer is always get a written agreement from your employer that says, I will go ahead and give the people who get through a pre-apprenticeship program first chance to interview. Doesn't say they're going to hire them, but they're going to interview them. So as we wrap up, to community colleges, you can do this. You probably already have this system in place. Financially, look at grants or your CBOs and how to braid that other kind of grant funding. And then Manny gave you a great idea that a lot of companies have strategic arms that they can, they understand that it costs a lot to interview and to hire somebody. They might be able to give you some funds for that so that it reduces those barriers as people come into pre-apprenticeship program. Start with a small program and grow it. Don't start with a huge one, start with a little one and grow it. And then the last thing is all the things that you find that work very well, share it. Share that, share what didn't work, but share it so that other community colleges and CBOs can work together and work together very well. So I think that's it for me, but it is doable.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rebecca and Manny, for that information about pre-apprenticeships, both with CBO and for the community college. So we're going to wrap up with having a Q&A portion, but before we do that, Following this session, now that we've heard from Tanner, Manny, and Rebecca, we just wanted to do another poll to kind of gauge what more you want to know about pre-apprenticeships. This session was a very, overarching session about pre-apprenticeships. And we were thinking, we could do way more webinars, WEO Wednesday webinars, or Workforce Wednesday webinars about pre-apprenticeships, or even some other avenues that we've discussed for putting out this information to the system, and to CBOs that might be interested in creating pre-apprenticeships. So this is multiple choice, this poll that I have up now. You can select multiple. So if you want to select, you want all of it. You want more information about funding, more information about recruitment, more information about program design and how to engage employers, feel free to click all of them. But if you just, specifically, you really would love, love, love a session about recruitment, feel free to select that, etc. So it's multiple choice, select all that apply. So following this webinar, what more information would you like to see about pre-apprenticeships? And as everyone is kind of wrapping up, answering that poll, I have some just ending housekeeping items that I'm going to go over. So I just want to reiterate that this session was recorded. The recording will be up on our Illinois Workforce Academy website, which that URL is in the chat. It's also going to be on Illinois WorkNet. So I work in collaboration with Illinois WorkNet to make sure all of the Workforce Wednesday webinars are cohesive between our website and theirs. So you can find the recording and the presentation on both websites, no matter which one you use. And then we also have a follow-up survey for you all. And so if you could take a couple seconds towards the end of the webinar, I'll put the follow-up survey in the chat for everybody once we're done with the Q&A, but I'm just going to put a plug in for it now. The same follow-up survey will be in the follow-up email as well, but I know for me, if I'm going to take a survey, I like to just take it right away, right after I've viewed the session or the material that I'm answering the questions on. That way it's fresh in my mind. And so we will have all of that ready to go for you also in the follow-up email tomorrow. You can access everything. So if you have to hop on another meeting, you don't have time to do it right now, that's no big deal. You will have all of that in the follow-up session. My PowerPoint is having a mind of its own today, so I apologize to everyone. But I'm going to end that poll. It looks like me and Rebecca, I know you were really interested to know this information. Looks like everybody wants a little bit of all of it, but mostly people want to know more about program design and specifically how to engage employers. So that's kind of where we're standing with that.
Yeah, and I went very high level on program design. We can make a whole webinar just on wrap around supports and how you do that and how you build it in, the technical training, the simulated work environment. We again kind of wanted to start here, see what would be the next logical step. And engagement of employers is always an interesting one. I was fortunate enough to spend half my career in economic development where the customer was the employer. And so, I've had a different view of this work as a workforce practitioner now because of that background. I would tell you that, it is not always easy. But again, there's other groups. Don't try to do this all by yourself. It's always good to work, again, either with an intermediary of some sort, a chamber. We have membership of employers, and maybe you work through them and you present to their membership. That is something that has been a really great resource for me. But I would just tell you high level, we could definitely do another one on that too. I think everybody always has a question on that. And Kirsten, I think there is one question in the chat.
Yeah, so it looks like there's a comment. So we're going to open it up to questions. So if you do have a question that you would like to ask Rebecca or Manny or myself live, feel free to raise your hand, your Zoom virtual hand. You can do that on your Zoom toolbar. There should be an option for reactions, and you can click raise your hand. And when you do that, I can unmute you and give you the opportunity to unmute. So feel free to do that if you want to ask a question live, or you can just type it in the chat or the Q&A. But the first question and kind of comment is from Nate Carlson. And they say they are a proud Harper alum. And they said, what percentage of pre-apprenticeships that you have been involved with developing have been basic skills training or bringing somebody up to speed as compared to a more internship adjacent model for students / career change individuals? They elaborated further and said, as a regional navigator, I see that employers are oftentimes interested in developing pre-apprenticeships as a recruitment mechanism, but don't always see their potential as a means of bridging skill gaps or creating opportunities for underserved individuals.
Well, I 100% agree with that last part of the comment. But let me talk about, like, I have only run programs that take folks that really don't have any exposure or existing skill sets for that occupation, for that apprenticeship pathway. And I have given them the basic foundational building blocks so that they're prepared and ready to learn on the job. And I think that's another key component of this. The pre-apprenticeship, we call it a journey worker in my sector. We're not here to train journeymen carpenter or journeywomen carpenters, electricians, plumbers. What I'm here to do is prepare entry-level first year to enter into the apprenticeship pathway. I think that's a key distinction. And I think that's really what the role of pre-apprenticeship is to provide those base foundational building blocks, right? So that they can build their career off of that. And that's why I was talking about with the math and the literacy. So often our folks don't have the math and the literacy required to jump in and be successful. Well, if that's the case, then your pre-apprenticeship has to solve that problem, right? And so, yes, I build it model. When we created the pre-apprenticeship framework at the state level, we were talking about that model, taking folks that don't have any experience, that have barriers, that may have limited math and literacy skills, and bridging them to that. That is, because I know you kind of done a little bit of both sides of that equation.
You're freezing up a couple of times, Manny. So, but we heard you. So I've done a pre-apprentice program. I didn't call it a pre-apprentice program. I call it a get ready program. That's what I called it, and it was for exactly what Manny was talking about, which was it was career exploration. It was understanding what is an apprenticeship and what are your expectations for the participant, and what should you expect your employer to also be doing this as part of the registered apprenticeship program, and what can you expect, and then getting them up to speed with literacy, math, that sort of thing, so they can come into, because all of ours except for one and the truck driving were AAS degrees. So so yes, you can do both, but you want to be really careful about what is it in your area that is needed, because it might be that somebody in advanced manufacturing might say, a company might say, listen, I would like to interview 2 people still in the pre-apprentice program and bring them in to work for a week at my place and pay them. So there's many different ways you can structure that. So That's a good question.
Yeah, I'm sorry about it. I'm going to turn off my video. I'm very sorry about that. I hope you got the gist of what I was saying, and to know our role. Man, I can see I'm still glitching because I can see your videos freezing up on me. But okay, I'm sorry about that.
Oh, you're okay, Manny. I think we're all, we joke in our office that technology issues are the new like traffic. Now that we're all virtual, everything's virtual. Okay, so if anybody else has any questions, feel free to put those in the chat or raise your hand. I don't see anything else coming through right this second. So I'm going to take that as an opportunity while you all are thinking about your questions to put in the chat the follow-up survey. So again, like I said, if you have a minute in your workday to take the follow-up survey, we do look at these. We do bring these to the WIOA PD committee. So you can feel free to give feedback on this survey, or if there's any future topics that you would like to hear about. We are planning for, the spring and summer for our PD for Wednesdays. So we definitely will be looking to the system because we want to provide PD that you all want to hear more about. So here is the follow-up survey. I just put that in the chat. And it didn't link for you all, but there we go. Now it's a hyperlink and you can click on it. I don't see any other questions coming through and nobody else is raising their hand. Manny or Rebecca, did you have anything else to add for today before we wrap up?
I do have one thing, is that the employability skills, there is a really nice Illinois employability skills. These are Illinois essential employability skills. It's a little packet that was done and you can all use it. And many colleges are using that because it gives them a start of where to look. I mean, it's very well done. And you don't have to use it all. You can just, tweak it. We, as community colleges, we borrow from each other and tweak it and make it our own. So it's already out there. And so feel free to use it.
Rebecca, I'm so glad you brought that up. There are so many, I've said best practices. There are a ton of resources out there that show different models of how to approach this. The core tenets of what we've identified today stay the same, but how you do that is going to be different, right? Because you're serving different populations, you're serving different regions, you're serving different sectors. And so, that's gonna inform the how. But you got to make sure that the pillars, those 6 points, that regardless if you're a CBO or a community college or whatever, that those are the core tenets and that you follow them, because that is what successful pre-apprenticeships have done throughout this country. And I think no point to Rebecca's point of reinventing the wheel.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to take this opportunity to thank both Manny and Rebecca for, giving us their time. We had many planning meetings about this session and what they each were going to talk about and focus on. And so I just really appreciate both of you donating your time. You're both very busy and have a million things going on. And so I just thank you for making the time to present this information and prepare it for the system. Again, this session was recorded. If you have a colleague who wasn't able to join today or somebody else that you think would benefit from this information, you will have access to that recording. You can send it along their way. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Have a great rest of your Wednesday and happy holidays.